Good morning, Mayor Phil Goff, councillors, IMSB members, members of the public, our staff, media, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. Today, Tuesday, 7th of March, 6th of the year, already gone. We've got a very full agenda today, and I will start with apologies. I have an apology that's been lodged with my office from Councillor Kathy Casey for absence, and Councillor Chris Fletcher for absence, and Councillor Penny Hulse on council business. Do I have any other apologies that have been lodged directly? And Councillor Alf Philippina for early departure. I don't have any others.
And Councillor Quacks.
Sorry?
He's here.
Councillor Quacks for early departure. Thank you, Councillor Quacks. Missed that one. I'll move receipt of those apologies.
Happy to second.
And I've seen the hand right over there with Councillor Sayers. Thank you very much, Councillor Sayers. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Members, under item 2, are there any declarations of interest that apply to any item or it's part of that item on the agenda today? Anybody? I haven't had anything raised. There being none, I'll move past declarations of interest and confirm the minutes. I'll move confirmation of the minutes of 7 February, and that should be 17. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I heard a voice, I couldn't see a hand. And Councillor Desley Simpson, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. I have no petitions that have been presented, so we go now to public input. Members, there have been 4 requests for public input today, and I've accepted one of those, and we'll hear from Mr. Ben Ross very soon. He'll be discussing Auckland's boom, and as has been often reminding us of the place of the South in Auckland's boom. I have members declined 3 requests for presentations under public input today. One was from a member of the public who wanted to speak to unitary plan matters and anomalies around that. Members, I've declined that because, as we all know, the unitary plan is subject to High Court and Environment Court actions right now, and that is the place for any changes to be aired. I've also declined another speaker who wanted to discuss congestion and the manufacturing of that congestion in Auckland. I've declined that request because the likely speaker has already spoken most recently at the governing body meeting, and I thought it was inappropriate for that to be repeated. I've also declined a requestee wanting to speak about the Tamaki Redevelopment Company and a subsidiary there. This request came to me in an email for the information prior. I've actioned that request and put that request to staff who are confirming it under a legoima. So it's being actioned under legoima. I'm too interested in the information and I await the information. So I've declined that speaker, that requestee, on the grounds that it has been referred to the legoima team. It has already been actioned. So we come to Mr. Ben Ross. Welcome, Ben. Good to have you here, and welcome to us from the south. And I think this is your first time in front of the Mayor Phil Goff Council.
This is my first time under the new administration. Last time I was here would have been August under the previous. So, yes.
In your hands, Ben.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ben, for stripping back the presentation a little bit and being succinct today, and appreciate that.
Yeah, it was just coincidental as I was submitting the input that the agenda items of the Auckland Plan Refresh and the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy had come up at the same time. Perfect timing, you could say. Just before I launch into it, I'll just give you a prelude into this morning. 7:48, Papakura to Britomart, Southern Line train, 3-car set. We were full but comfortable by Takanini, first station in. Manuera, we were packed but still comfortable. By Otahu, we were sardine mode and it was a case of personal space issues. Britomart, it was all out. So those are the pressures we are facing. Just remember that when I come up to a particular slide about the Otahu bottleneck. The Auckland Plan refresh has come up today and you'll be discussing it at length, no doubt. As I said, it's an urban geography issue, mainly about the spatial development of Auckland and the variations within itself, but also looking abroad as well as variations. Auckland is not alone. At the moment, I've been watching developments in Greater Sydney where the New South Wales State Government and the respective Sydney councils are developing a city from scratch over in Western City around the new airport that the state government and federal governments are planning. How does this relate to Auckland? While we're not building a new city so-called in scratch, we are tending towards what I call a twin city development, often seen in the United States, and lessons learned in Greater Sydney could be equally applied here if we don't want to mess it up with things like traffic congestion. And it looks like the rest of the PDF's gone missing.
We will support you in that, Ben. Would you like to carry on speaking? And
Yep.
we'll do our very best to get it back up.
What I've left in the presentation, which it's either distributed or will be later on, is I've left a hypothesis there on Auckland's centre of gravity moving slowly away from the isthmus and moving towards southern Auckland. You would be asking how I came to this hypothesis. It's basically to do with the next graph along, and this is from the ATAP, the most recent edition of the ATAP. Most of the residential population growth is occurring greater than 20 kilometres away from the city centre. Now that 20 kilometre radius is basically from Monaco to the south, Westgate to the northwest, and Albany to the north. However, most of the employment growth is occurring within 5 kilometres of the city centre and not not at the 20 kilometre range further out. I had written a blog post yesterday, which I will link up later again today, on Auckland being the donut city. As a fellow planner raised with me, most of our higher density residential development is occurring on the fringe, like a donut, with employment growth in the middle, like a jam splodge. The problem with that, well, that comes back to that Southern Line example, doesn't it? We are forced to commute north either by rail or by car. Now, the Southern Motorway was light today while my train was full. You can appreciate the irony that Auckland, or South Auckland at least, is catching transit, which is a good thing, but it becomes a victim of its own success. Packed trains put people off, which means the motorway gets jammed up again. The issue at hand is that bottleneck between Middlemore and Westfield. State Highway 1 is technically 4 lanes at Mount Wellington, and we only have 2 lines, or 2 mains, at Otahu. Even with the 3rd main, we couldn't get much more capacity through there on the rail network, and we can't get much more capacity through cars on the motorway either. This creates a problem, a rather large problem at that. What I'm asking today is, when you look at the Auckland Plan refresh, I place strong emphasis on fostering, yes, the city centre will grow because of the agglomeration bonus, but we also must look at the south. The south's residential growth is beginning to run away on us. More future urban zone land is being opened up faster than anticipated, and even in the transformed Monaco area, what was meant to be a 900 housing development has shot up to 1,200. So the demand's there for residential, but we seem to be lagging behind in our planning for employment. If we are to reduce pressures on that bottleneck, because that bottleneck also affects our freight, we need to look at how can we foster employment in the south. We've already got Monaco City Centre as a commercial hub, but we also need to look at our industrial precincts, our big heavy industrial units as well. How can they foster growth as well? Remembering also that with the south as well as the northwest and the north, not everyone will go to work in the service sector. People will go into the primary and manufacturing sectors as well. So how can we foster that industry? And from there, I'll leave that with you. Just remembering, my train was packed this morning. It's only going to get worse, even when the city rail link is complete. We can't bring 300,000 people north and south each morning. You can't do it from the northwest with the Northwestern Motorway and Busway. You can't do it from the North Shore either, even if light rail was built. We have bottlenecks, we need to address them. Happy to take questions.
Thanks. Thank you, Ben. Councillor Walker.
Just before Councillor Walker. Oh, okay, there's got lots again.
You've got
The
one more
hypothesis, no, that's the hypothesis slide that I couldn't be sure I was going to just leave it up there as the questions were being asked. Sorry,
We'll leave
Councillor
that
Walker.
on the
There's
board.
one who uses the motorways every morning. Takes 2 hours to get here. Half the congestion is done by trucks.
Yep.
And the trucks get in the fast lane at 90 k's. They slow it down. If they had a rule where they do like they do in Italy, where they have to stick to the inside lane and use the truck lane only, it would make the congestion less, I'm sure. It's a real problem.
Something for us to submit to NZTA, possibly, Councillor Walker, and happy to discuss that further with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may just comment on that one quickly.
You may.
And also a help to that one too would be to get the third main from Otahu to Papakura built as fast as possible so we can increase the usage of our freight trains as well. The Southern Line's at capacity. Kiwi Rail can't bring any more freighters up as it stands, so we need to get that third main in there as well to help relieve the motorway.
Thank you, Ben.
Yes,
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
thanks, Mr Chair. Good to see you, Ben. You're right about the third main, of course. When you hypothesize, do you take into account the airport developments, the preliminary plan changes, Drury South, the commercial growth around Pukekohe and Ardmore?
Yes, I have factored in those. Most of them I've marked as the heavy industrial complexes. South Auckland has 4, Onehunga is the 5th one, although that's currently in the stage of decamping. I did factor that in, but the catch is how fast can we bring them online? How can we encourage them to bring them online faster? Because at the moment, residential's up here, but employment's a bit down here at the moment. We need to try and get employment ahead of the residential curve to try and keep the commuters home. But it brings up the second point, how far away is that busway from Puanui Station to the airport to help relieve congestion on State Highway 20 as well, and the Puanui Gateway?
Talking about that this morning. So what was the employment number you came up with in total of those new developments?
The new employment, residential I know straight off the head was 55, at minimum 55,000 new dwellings just in the future urban zones alone. For industry and Manukau, I had about 35,000 at the, if it's fully developed to its full potential.
Thank you. Further questions of Ben? There being none, I'm very delighted to move receipt of Ben's presentation here today and place it on the public record. Do I have a second? Councillor Simpson. Ben, great to have you along.
Thank you.
Always appreciate your analysis that you go into in building your arguments to present to us, and we'll see you in the future championing the South.
Thank you, Councillor.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, members. That leaves us to go now
Your
to
reasons.
extraordinary.
I do not
I'll go to
accept your
local
reasons
board.
for declining me speaking rights. I believe they are unlawful. I've left a message with the Auckland District Commander, Superintendent Karen Malfos. I am quite capable. No, it's not okay.
Thank
There's
you,
a
Ms.
multi-million-dollar
Bright.
scam
And
that's going on
you've
here
had
that
my
involves...
response. You've had it very clear. You've had it in
No,
writing.
it's
you've had it
unlawful,
orally,
Chris.
and I
I've
have made it
tested this in
extremely
court more
clear
than any other
why I
person.
have declined
No, and you
your
are not
request to
right
speak.
in law.
And so
This matter has not
I am
been
now
considered
asking
by
you
this
that you are Thank you. So members, we've closed the public input, and we now go to local board input, and we will be hearing from our Great Barrier Island community and board chair, Izzy, on the concept of establishing a dark sky sanctuary and accreditation for that. Welcome, Izzy, and welcome, Richard. Izzy, would you like to introduce Richard and tell us about Richard and the concept?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your time this morning. Mayor Phil, councillors, Independent Māori Strategy Board members, good morning. Yes, we're here to do a brief information item to you on our aspirations to gain independent dark sky accreditation for a sanctuary. The IDA is based in America, and its mission is to protect the night skies for present and future generations. Now, as you may be aware, Aotearoa Great Barrier Island has some of the most pristine skies in the country. So we've done a lot of work. Richard, on my right, ex-board member and resident in Trifina, and his wife, Jendi, have done an enormous amount of work in guiding us through this process. Now, the goals of the IDA, as they're known, is to advocate for protection of the skies, to educate the public and policymakers about night sky conservation, to promote environmentally responsible outdoor lighting, empower the public with the tools and resources to help bring back the night sky. Now, on the screen above, you will see various photographs that have been taken of the night skies on Aotearoa Great Barrier Island. So enjoy those as I hand over to Richard, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about planning stuff.
Okay, thanks, Izzy, and thank you, councils. We appreciate the opportunity. The idea for this came when the preparation of a seminar that the Awana Rural Women was doing on Is There Life Out There? That seminar meant that we had a number of world recognised astronomers visiting the island. They were amazed at the quality of the light, and as part of the whole process, we realised we had a very small and short opportunity to protect the quality of the light sky over Great Barrier for the future, for future generations, and for economic development on Great Barrier and the wider Auckland. The basics, there is a lot of legal detail that we're working through, but the basics, what are the basics? Simply put, limit the amount of light you need and limit the amount of light you use, limit the intensity for outdoor light, shield light, shade the lights, and have reasonable curfews. These are not too difficult. It's very easy on the barrier because on the entire island we have precisely 4 lights that at the moment break the standard. And that's out of a 288 square kilometre area. The technical surveys we undertook to do this involved several trips around the Great Barrier Island, lasting all night for several nights. The readings we got, I'll put in very simple terms. In the centre of Auckland, at the middle of night, you can see maybe 200 stars. On Waiheke, maybe 2,000 to 3,000 stars. On Great Barrier, 5 to 6. This is a very unique place. Our readings were actually better on first cut than the readings that are obtained in the reserve area of Tekapo around Mount John. We have better, darker skies on the barrier than probably anywhere else in New Zealand. That's worth protecting. We took a draft submission to the IDA, and that has come back, and there are some relatively minor details that we will have to go through with the planning department to ensure that we get precisely the regulatory structure they require. I'm working with planners at the moment in harmonising that. The difficulty we appreciate is the barrier at the moment is operating under the Hauraki Golf Plan. That doesn't quite meet the standards, but we would hope that the submission that we will put to you eventually would have you accepting the IDA detail as precise requirements for planning on Great Barrier. The planning regime is the best place to put the legal protection and the legal defence for this. We're running in a very short deadline. For completely arbitrary reasons, we would like to be able to do the launch at Matariki this year. This means we actually have to have the sort of terminology of intent and the statements of intent and the guidelines acceptable to the IDA in place pretty well at the end of March. We're working very hard, and I'd like to express appreciation here to the planners, Jaume Shada, Peter Abasi and Anna Constantinou, who are working with me to do this. We will need we will need a section in the unitary plan when it is adjusted to the barrier that recognises dark sky status and protects it, and requires that the discretionary level of consent is applied in all instances. Again, we're talking about outside light, not indoor light. Why is it important? Technology change. At the moment, we are pristine and pure on the barrier because we have no choice. It is too expensive to run your generators. We have solar panels. These things are changing. The solar technology has meant that the power of the solar panels now is such you can actually get enormous power from relatively simple and very cheap technology. Battery technology is changing. The worst case scenario would be some extreme egotist planning to stand for elective position in some large country, putting his name in permanent lights blazed up into the sky forever. At the moment, we're protected. We need that to remain. My analogy is with rats. Imagine what it would have been like if we'd had the protection when the first ship arrived. And that's what we're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Izzy. More than an interesting concept, members. Are there questions of Izzy and Richard? Councillor Lee.
Richard and Izzy, thank you very much. Can you just confirm in regard to Tekapo, which I understand is an international draw card for astronomers and people who like to look at the heavens. Are you saying that barrier, the sky over barrier, is as dark as at Tekapo?
Councillor Lee, thank you. Yes, actually it's darker. We thought the problem would be on the barrier's west coast where it faces Auckland. In fact, our darkest readings on the night of the tests were from the west coast. You can see a slight light glow from Auckland, but it's extremely light. You can actually see major planets setting in the west through the lights of Auckland, so it is darker. To give you an idea of where this goes, Tekapo has in excess now of 100,000 to 200,000, I think. I can confirm those figures if necessary, but about 100,000 tourists per year, paying several hundred each for the privilege of walking up on the mountain, getting cold and looking at the skies. It has enormous potential economically. The Tekapo people have been very supportive, and they would be delighted for an equivalent type of structure to arise on the barrier simply because Tekapo is full. The idea being, one of the ideas being, we're not talking about mass tourism or anything like that, but as an economic driver, you don't need necessarily to go to Tekapo if you're visiting Auckland. You can see the dark skies from the barrier. This is an Auckland initiative, not just a barrier initiative.
Can I just ask
Councillor
one more question? In terms of plan changes and the unitary plan, are there any steps on Great Barrier to request voluntary compliance in regard to outdoor lighting.
Richard, if you could just back off the mic a little bit, it's quite sensitive, and we'll hear you more clearly.
Okay, thanks. The irony is we actually don't need the voluntary compliance. As I said, we only have 4 lights that are actually even vaguely near that. One of them has been resolved when I talked to Izzy. In terms of voluntary compliance, I've talked to 2 people of the other recognised lights, and they were turned off. I think when this is launched, there will need to be a campaign and leaflets and that sort of thing. So far, informally on the barrier, we've had only support. I've had no significant resistance to it from anyone, and I think that'd be the same, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a magnificent display there. I'm really supportive of the idea. I just wanted to know, but following on from Councillor Lee's question, if there's any absentee landowners who you might not have canvassed that may, following on your conversations about solar power capacity, etc., then in the future you think might be planning something that could be not so supportive of this? Is there any that kind of scenario going on?
Not as yet. The actual planning terms in the unitary plan are exceedingly complex and have never been used, as far as I'm aware. We are looking at what the technical differences are between the IDA specifications and the existing plan specifications. In broad terms, the plan does provide for protection of the night sky. Now, that's a very generalised phrase. Whether it meets the IDA's requirements, they will probably give us time to get it in adjustment, which brings us into the unitary plan process. I don't know. The council officers that I've spoken to believe that they could, to some degree, apply as if that rule applied on the grounds that lighting, outdoor lighting that goes outside some very broad parameters is a discretionary activity anyway. So that might be it. But in terms of, I don't think at the moment anyone is planning to do massive lighting. The technology is beginning, but it's there. But I think we have to act, and we have to act fairly quickly to bring it in. One of the options is to ask for a plan change to the Hauraki Golf District Plan. Now, I don't see that will be necessary, but in the worst case scenario, you'll have me back in a month's time asking for a plan change.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Just following on from that as well, Councillor Cooper, I did approach Vector to see if they had any intention or aspirations to provide reticulated power. They don't want to know about it, so
okay.
safe in that field.
Good.
Councillor Walker?
Sure. Can you just give us an idea of the global context around this? I mean, how many other, are there a lot of places that have this dark sky?
The wording we've heard is there are approximately 3 or 4 that have sanctuary status. There are a few more that have reserve status. Reserve is a higher status with much tighter legal thresholds. The reason being is most of the reserves are closely associated with observatories and in places that you wouldn't want to visit anyway, top of a mountain in Chile, for example. Tekapo has reserve status, and that's largely driven by Mount John Observatory, and to some extent Tekapo tacked the tourism business onto the fact that it had Mount John. I'm only partially arguing for a tourist response here. The major reason is to protect it as an irreplaceable asset that we have at the moment, and we don't want to lose.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Thanks, Izzy and Richard. You mentioned in your presentation you thanked some of the planning staff for their support at council. Can you just confirm what they've supported you to do to date, and what, if anything, you need them to do for the future? I
was discussing it with them yesterday. To date, we fired the complex rules of the IDA to them, and they reviewed existing plans, existing regional policy statements, etc., all the way basically through the RMA hierarchy, and came up with their interpretations of what the current rules are, where they fit and obviously going forward where they think we need to go. They believe that they believe at the moment that they don't need more resource. I asked them if they wanted me to ask you for resource. I would appreciate your telling them that it is a priority because it is for Great Barrier and that the resource should be made available. At the moment, we are trying to get a technical level advice as to the difference between the specifications of IDA, which are expressed in lux, LUX, versus the the other way around. Our plan is expressed in lux and the IDA is expressed in lumens, and there's a, what does it mean? And the difficulty we have is the two parts of the rules that don't apply are shading and shielding, and they're not entirely sure the current law would allow them to impose too higher restrictions on that. So there are some issues. In terms of what you could do, obviously a resolution in support and a resolution saying yes, you intend and in principle have no problems with it, either for the Hauraki Golf Plan or for the unitary plan going forward.
Right. And second question, have you presented to the Hauraki Forum? What is it, the
Hauraki Golf Forum?
No, not at this stage, no.
Final question, Councillor Holtz. This is the final question, members.
Thank you, Mr Chair, for your indulgence. Just thinking about the wider New Zealand network and the ability to make this a bit of a tourism, a linked tourism experience for New Zealand, I think this is absolutely critical. And I just wonder if we are working in collaboration with and sharing information with Otago Regional Council and Dunedin City Council, who have done a huge amount of work on the dark skies proposal. And secondly, I think, Mr Chair, if there is a way that we can just give a little bit of a nudge to the answer to the Councillor Simpson got, I think this is exceedingly important, but it is also, not to put too fine a point on it, a fantastic tourism and business opportunity for the barrier, which we've been looking for. Thank you, Penny.
Thank you, and thanks for that comment to close, members. So, of course, the request here today is for us to resolve a direction, and we don't have a staff paper to support such a consideration or a direction. But I'm hearing from Director Chief of Strategy, Mr Quinn, that there are no to negligible budget implications with this, and I think it's about lending our support. And I'm very happy as Chair of the committee to work with Councillor for the ward, Councillor Lee, to work with the board, to work with the community to achieve the outcome of a dark sky sanctuary.
We could, Mr Chairman, we could ask
Lee,
advice from the Stardome management in regard to this. They would certainly have a professional interest.
Stakeholder.
So I think we will, would Councillor Lee like to move receipt of the presentation from the Great Barrier Local Board Chair, Izzy, and Richard Somerville Ryan from the Great Barrier Island Astronomers Group, and that's regarding the proposed dark sky sanctuary accreditation. And thank you both for your contributions here today. I have a second from Councillor Clow. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no, and declare that carried.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enlightened. Members, we don't have further local board input, but we have had indirect local board input on a matter which we'll consider under the extraordinary or the confidential items, the public excluded items, and that is being conveyed via email. They no longer wish to attend. That's the Māngere o Tahohu local board. There are no extraordinary items that I'm aware of or have been brought to my attention. There are no notices of motion, which takes us to item 9, and members, I refer to my email of yesterday, and I've considered both those reports under 9 and 10, and I consider that there's more preparatory work required, as I outlined in my email to you yesterday, and we will consider those items on the 28th of this month. So that takes us to item 11, which is the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy Refresh. And welcome David Hawkey and Amanda Harland, who have been doing sterling work in this refresh. And which one of you is going to open? Is it?
Thank you,
Amanda
Mr.
has
Chair.
got it.
My intention is to just quickly run through some key points on the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy Refresh and then take questions, if that's okay.
Thank you.
So the purpose of the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, which was adopted in November of 2015, was really to provide a 30-year program to sequence 15, at that time 11,000 hectares of future urban land. It signals when these areas will be development ready and ensures that infrastructure costs are distributed over the 30-year time frame. And it really provides a proactive and strategic approach to ensuring there's an ongoing supply of urban land, greenfield land in these areas. So the purpose of the refresh, there are two key reasons. The refresh was signalled in the earlier version of the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, and mainly because of the unitary plan. So we have had the unitary plan decisions which have made some significant changes to these areas. Firstly, it increased the amount of land zoned future urban, as well as live zoning, or bringing into effect operative zoning in many of these areas. So we needed to review the strategy and make sure it was current. We're also wanting to align the strategy with recent technical work that's been undertaken, such as supporting growth work that in the transport field that was formerly known as Transport for Future Urban Growth Project. The proposed changes are really around the sequencing. There are some, as I said before, there's some areas that have been brought forward, mainly because of the live zoning through the unitary plan, and there are some areas that have been put back, mainly due to infrastructure constraints. There are also some areas of rural settlement, future urban zoning and rural settlement, which is rural settlement areas, which have been identified again through the unitary plan. These areas were previously, or currently in the current Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, not identified, and these areas are now being brought in. They make up around 11% of the now 15,000 hectares of future urban land. There is a public engagement process being proposed. Targeted public engagement on the sequencing is proposed between the 29th of March and the 18th of April. An outline of this proposed engagement process is identified in the report. And in summary, the report recommends approval of the proposed changes to the strategy for public engagement, approval of a targeted public engagement process, and establishment of a deliberations panel of up to 6 members, including IMSB, to consider engagement feedback and report back to the committee. And also a delegation to the chair, the power to make additional or adjustments to the panel. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, David. Look, sometimes we leave the acknowledgements to the very last, but I've been hugely impressed by the way you've gone about this refresh, the collaborative embracing with NZTA, on our own Healthy Waters, Water Care, Auckland Transport, and a lot of others, to make sure that we get all the inputs at this stage, and we're not grappling for issues later on. So I really appreciate the way you've conducted this refresh. It's made it a lot easier for all of us here. Thank you. Questions at this stage, members? Councillor Newman.
Thank you very much, Amanda and David, and excellent work. At the unitary plan hearings for the IHP, this is in relation to Takanini. Phil Jaggard from Healthy Waters entered into the evidence of that hearing
very compelling information about the stormwater infrastructure costs in Takanini North. He actually put the price tag at a minimum for $200 million for the infrastructure work just required for drainage in Takanini North. In that evidence, he proposed that there was a need to undertake a detailed stormwater assessment to assess development scenarios. So my question is, has that development assessment has that stormwater assessment taken place yet? And if so, can that information be made available?
Through you, Mr Chair, I believe the assessment has been undertaken, and we have just been advised of the preliminary findings of that assessment. As to whether we can provide that and what state or what form it's in, I would need to get back to you on that.
I'll take that offline.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I echo your opening remarks. I think this is a fantastic piece of work, and I think it underpins the fact that we needed to start with the Auckland plan first about what we were going to do where and when. We then sleeved in the unitary plan, and then it's given birth to these subsequent plans that tie the whole thing together. So thinking about the way that we should be planning for the next 30 years, I'll use an example of Whenuapai, and given the fact that we were a little bit startled by the live zoning of the Red Hills area, I'm a little bit concerned that some of the timings, particularly maybe in Whenuapai, that we are not necessarily addressing the issue of needing jobs equal to houses. We're very house focused, and you know, the media and some of the loudest voices have been very house focused, but it is of equal importance that we have jobs. Now, thank God we've got Westgate, because we will have jobs and do have jobs at Westgate, but I'm just a little bit concerned with the sequencing, for instance, in the Whenuapai area, that we perhaps might not be bringing commercial industrial land on soon enough. And I'm just, I guess, asking the question, am I misreading that, or are we getting jobs there in parallel?
If we go to page 37 of the agenda, and I think it's attachment F, and not all the numbers are tallied, members, but I've tallied the job number as 67,000 in this future urban land supply strategy, but I'll allow Amanda to expand on that.
Where are they?
Thank you, Mr Chair. My understanding is that the Whenuapai structure plan allows for some employment zoning in that stage 1. And there is also some further employment land identified in the stage 2, but the stage 1 it does have employment land identified through the structure planning.
Okay. I guess the essence of my question, Mr Chair, is that we've become very exercised about getting houses built. We cannot make houses or let people live in areas where there are no jobs. So the second question to that is, some of the sequencing for our roading infrastructure and public transport infrastructure will not adequately service those jobs. So we'll have the houses and then possibly the jobs, but possibly no way for people to get to them. So I'm just, and this is a broad brush question, you know, for instance, again, thinking of some of the developments that we're having in the northwest, we are building or preparing to build houses hand over fist, and we're still condemning those people to drive to South Auckland to get jobs. So we either sort out the jobs in time, or we sort out the infrastructure, and I guess I'm advocating most strongly that we do not take the pedal off the metal of the bus, that if those houses are going to proceed apace in the northwest, that we start to really apply that pressure to ATAP and say no houses without the northwest busway. So I know that I'm conflating 3 separate things into one, but I cannot express more strongly my concern that we keep the sequencing absolutely tied to the big picture that our staff have articulated so well, and that we don't get diverted by political expediency and the media. Is that a question? Can we do that, Mr Chair?
I think it's been answered by yourself.
And that's often a wise answer.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you. I mean, what she said, and also emphatically, I'm pleased that the Kumu urban land supply has gone back a bit, but when you look at the, hang on, I've had to move this page, something around the structure plan process. We've got the next lot of structure plans are all in the south, and I'm quite concerned that we've already got, you know, prior Auckland Council planning stuff being delivered now in the northwest from both Rodney and Waitakere, but we haven't kept up with the transport. And we also, there's no indication of when any more structure plans will happen in that northwest, the Kumus, the rural towns. We've only got 3 places in South Auckland, and I'm absolutely clear there's 50% of the growth going down there. That needs to happen, but there's another quarter of Auckland's growth going up in the northwest, and we've just finished one structure plan and nothing else indicated here for planning, and I think that's crucial to the communities that live there because they're feeling like no one's taking any notice of their plight, especially around the transport. And we heard from Mr. Wright this morning, 300,000 people are moving across purposes, across the region every day. And everybody's upset and frustrated and basically probably not doing their blood pressure any good in their lifespan because they're having to go other places to work. So I know so my question is, what are we doing about structure plans, and will we see a plan of how we're going to roll those out over time, not just the next 3? Thank you.
Amanda, the timing, sequencing of the structure plans.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the sequencing laid out in the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy gives an indication of the rollout of structure planning. So we've always said that structure planning ideally will occur around 3 years before the area is ready to go with live zoning and the infrastructure in place. So that effectively gives an indication of the programming for structure planning.
Could I just have a supplementary for that, Mr. Chairman, which does relate to that? Yes, my big concern is we absolutely know we have strategies, and then we have someone with a private plan change, push, 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 and then all of a sudden our strategic arm and then our consenting arm doesn't kind of match. So I suppose I want to know, are we actually matching those up? Because we've had some really poor outcomes in some parts of Westgate where we said, no, this is the plan, it's to go here, and then someone says, I want to do something over here, and our staff say, well, we can't say no, we have to let them apply. And I get really concerned about stuff being in the wrong places, people doing stuff that we never envisaged and never planned for, and then the kind of unintended consequences and what we have to deal with because of that. So how do we get around that where we've got a whole bunch of people that go, no, I want to do this somewhere, and they push? How do we,
Amanda,
have we got any power in that regard?
Full answer on that one, Amanda?
So what I'm saying is, and something will go ahead and there's been no structure plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, the private plan change process has to take its course, but the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy is there as a guide as to what Council's priorities are. So that's its purpose in life, I guess.
Thank you.
And I suppose it's worth recognising one of the key principles of the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy when it was developed was the idea that structure planning would be linked quite closely to when things would be market ready. We didn't want to have situations where you structure plan many years before it's market ready and the work that's done is not relevant to the situation at hand.
And if there's an example of how nimble we can be and have exhibited in terms of structure planning, it's the structure plan for Whenuapai, which Councillors Hulse and Cooper recently knocked off, if I can, as bluntly, in a very quick time, and again a very inclusive process. So I think we're changing the way we do our business to respond as well. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amanda and David, thank you. I've got a couple of process questions. So first around the public engagement, because this is basically a refresh, you said in essence most of the stakeholders or affected parties are already known. My question to you is, because we're doing annual plan consultation in March before yours starts, is there any material you could potentially have at those meetings just to flag to people it's coming up at the end of this process?
Yeah. Yes, we could put together a package of information that would be useful for those meetings.
It just
definitely.
maybe could, tidy up any stragglers if they're coming for one thing, going on to the other. But my next one is around the panel. So you've got in the paper that you considered whether the deliberations panel should be governing body or local board, and you've determined that potentially not local board. And I just wondered why you've done that as opposed to potentially having an equal number of local board members and governing body members, bearing in mind there's only 6 local boards affected anyway, and a panel of 12 is hardly huge.
I suppose our thinking, or through the chair, our thinking of that was a couple of assumptions that we made, and I suppose that is the reason that we, in the end, asked for delegated authority to the chair to expand it if our assumptions perhaps weren't right. The first thing was we looked at the deliberations panel last time, which we thought worked well. One of the reasons for that was a smaller panel seemed to go quite well. So with increased size, it brings its own sort of challenges. The first thing, this is a regional strategy which needs to be addressed by the regional committee and meet trade-offs across the region. So our thinking was having regional councillors on that deliberations panel was important. The third thing is that during consultation there is opportunities for local boards to make submissions and be involved in that as well. So we thought, looking at last time where we looked at that feedback, that worked well. So that were the assumptions. However, we did, I suppose, say, there's opportunity to add to that if those assumptions weren't right.
So, supplementary if I may. So I get your assumption, but I suppose my question is, in the shared governance model, is that assumption a fair assumption?
Well, ultimately, I suppose that's a decision for the committee to make, but that's our recommendation.
And if you end up by asking the chair and the deputy to have a discretion to invite everybody else, you might as well just start with the team in the beginning.
We'll come to that recommendation C when I move it shortly, and we'll address that issue. Thanks, Councillor Simpson. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for the report, very full report. I'm just looking at the bottom line, and the cost you've got set out on page 38 of bulk infrastructure over the next decade from 2018 is $6.7 billion. Can you tell us how up to date that costing is? Is that something that we can rely on? Does that take into account the growth that we've received in the last couple of years as against the period before that when it was only at a third the rate? And can you tell us what you think the estimated shortfall is in terms of meeting that infrastructure cost in terms of the funding that we've got set aside for that development?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The figures that are in the report are up to date, so they're an update of the figures that we had previously in the current future urban land supply strategy, which was around 17 billion. So yes, they have gone up. They take into account recent technical work that's been undertaken, as I mentioned before, the supporting growth work which looks at all the transport in the greenfield areas. That's a significant cost in these areas. In terms of shortfall, my understanding is that much of this growth is not budgeted for. Maybe 10% or so is budgeted for, but largely the bulk of the funding is not budgeted.
So that 90% of the 6.7 billion that we need in the next decade is not currently budgeted for. Is there an overlap between this and the projected figure for the Auckland Transport Alignment Project, where it's talking about a $4 billion deficit over the next 10 years? Are we double counting to add those together?
I My understanding is, through the Chair, the Auckland Transport Alignment project did pick up a number of these projects. However, we would have to go back and work out how much of, I suppose, to reconcile those. So I couldn't give you a figure off the top of my head.
Okay.
Certainly some.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Wayne Walker?
Sure. I just make the observation when I read the key considerations across a number of the areas, and I'm looking particularly at the north, but also the northwest and the like. There's an absence of environmental considerations, especially around flooding, sedimentation, where you've got very sensitive coastal environments like Okura, projects like the Northwest Wild Link that impacts on the north, loss of leach soils, and I could go on. Is there a reason why we're not putting in any environmental considerations and just focusing around infrastructure? Because in some instances the flooding concerns are severe.
Amanda, do you want to just briefly explain the role of others in contributing to this document?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I guess firstly, environmental considerations were taken into account when the future urban areas were first identified through the rural-urban boundary identification process. Areas that were environmentally sensitive or subject to significant flooding were eliminated or avoided from these areas. Also, the professional input has been provided from other parts of council through the ongoing refinement process of these areas, and it is also expected that through the structure planning process, environmental issues will be addressed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand the answer, but it doesn't escape the fact that in a number of areas there are significant environmental constraints and concerns that we appear to be just running roughshod over. That's my perspective. The other issue I've got just goes to that around costs, and I'm looking on page 38, particularly around the budgeting that we're looking at for parks and community. And without doing too much analysis, my projection would be that what we're going to have going forward is an Auckland that is nothing like what we're used to in terms of the provision of open space. Those figures are just grossly inadequate, and that goes to the contributions regime that we're going forward. I repeat, it will be nothing like the Auckland that we're used to. You'll have phenomenal intensity and hardly any park space.
Thank you. And Councillor Hills, Councillor Watson, and then Councillor Clough.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Thank you. I guess, for me, it doesn't take a genius to see the problems we already have in Auckland, especially with the current, greenfield subdivisions coming on scene, on track with no or little public transport. Are we setting ourselves up to fail? I mean, and it just, we've got it here. In the middle decade, it jumps from 6.7 billion to 9.7 billion for infrastructure. Most of that is transport. And is this still too fast to then encourage the, it says in here only 30% is greenfield, but do we make this so easy and attractive to just keep building greenfield that we actually don't get the 70% of the intensification we need until the last decades, because that's all that's left? It just, I mean, I might be looking at it too simplistically, but...
So through you, Mr. Chair, this piece of work really only looks at the future urban areas. The other big piece of the puzzle is the existing urban areas, of which, as you say, 70% of growth is anticipated to go into those areas, and that piece of work still needs to be done and refined.
Yeah, so I guess for me, I am a little concerned that if we push this out too far, then and too quick. I mean, I'm glad some areas have been put on hold because it's obvious that we cannot afford, or there is no way to get transport and other things out there. But I just wonder if we suddenly look at this, then it makes intensification not as attractive because, there's some greenfields coming up soon and that's a blank slate. So I just hope that we're not focusing for 30 years, but all the intensification happens at the end. But we still did it within the 30, which,
I suppose just to reinforce what, through the Chair, Amanda's saying, I mean, this is one piece, I suppose, of the overall response to growth puzzle. And I suppose what it does indicate is, greenfield growth does include significant costs. So I suppose as discussions go on the broader development strategy, the calibration of greenfields versus brownfields versus rural will be some key discussions that this council will need to have. And I suppose it also shows, also worth noting, that part of the strategy is to monitor the uptake of this greenfield growth. If it is showing that it's not being uptaken at the speed that we anticipated, or there was more uptake in the brownfield urban areas, it may be the case that not all of this supply of greenfield land is required. So it is an ongoing process, I suppose.
If I could just add, I think the other thing to keep in mind is there's only roughly 140,000, 130,000 sites being freed up, which over the 30 years is clearly nowhere near enough. So the pressure will still be on the commercial requirement for the isthmus and other areas to intensify, or we really will have a concern. So this can't be the answer on its own under any metric.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question goes to the Wainui East Silverdale Dairy Flat area and the infrastructure sequencing considerations, and it kind of builds a little on what Councillor Hills was talking in terms of monitoring what's actually happening on the ground. In areas such as this, where you have big developments about to start, that have been resource consented and that are kind of apart from, everything that's been approved during the unitary plan process, what's our oversight or our monitoring, what's actually happening on the ground? And I think particularly in terms of the rather vague references to transport infrastructure and wastewater to a lesser extent, but certainly transport infrastructure, where you have a compounding effect, as is going to happen in this area, and we still have these kind of rather vague references to what might be happening down the line. So in terms of speed of build and impact on existing networks as distinct from what's going to happen in year 2030 or something, what is our on the ground monitoring, and B, what is our ability then to respond when clear issues arise?
Through the Chair, I suppose the best, we do have a group within council who has relationships with developers, which is the Development Program Office. They've done work already as a part of this to look at some of the infrastructure needs. As that work goes on, I imagine that will be monitored. So I suppose overall they have a role in monitoring and coordinating that infrastructure to make sure that it's in place, and then I suppose seeing how it's going in reality. So that's a part of our operational division.
So Mr. Chair, sorry, and this goes to what some other councillors have asked. In instances clearly where we are presupposing, busways or bridges or stuff, and things are consented and the building's happening at pace, what then happens when they don't come out the other side? Because I think that's probably in the back of everyone's mind. What happens in terms of our ability then to respond? We don't have an ability, do we?
Dave, you've got...
Sorry, I'm slightly I'm slightly unclear about the question.
Can you clarify that question? Well, if you read through the infrastructure sequencing considerations, and we're giving approval to developments of all manner, and they're actually premised on funds coming through, and I'm thinking particularly of transport infrastructure here as opposed to wastewater. The pattern of the last decade or so or longer in certain parts is where they just don't emerge. In fact, sometimes as projects are cut back, communities question they're asking, well, what happens then when this stuff doesn't arise, and
we've allowed all this to happen. I guess it's a simplistic observation that, we're left holding the baby, aren't we?
Through the chair, I'll try to answer that. I suppose this strategy is in effect the intentions of council at this moment in these greenfield areas. There is a number of parameters that could change this. I mean, the first is, this is, as we've mentioned before, a lot of these things are unfunded. There will be processes that we need to go through, and particularly the long-term plan, to establish what infrastructure that will in fact service and build in these areas. So obviously if that long-term plan makes decisions not to invest in some of this infrastructure whilst this sequencing is changed. The other side of it is that through structure planning and also working with developers, there is a process of, I suppose, these things being built. So there's factors around determining that, and a lot of that is about the land holdings in these areas and things like that, developer pick up itself. So this is why I suppose monitoring is important, so we understand how this strategy plays out, and it may need to be adjusted in time.
Thank you. Councillor Clough?
In the light of the answer David gave to the Mayor's question about is all this money effectively allocated or how much, I mean, do we need another resolution just to tighten this up a little bit to make sure that we have this work done sooner rather than later? Because it's not just transport, it is the other. And we're all zooming along on the premise that we're $4 to $5 billion short over the next decade, but maybe it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we know, so do we need another resolution?
Can I just ask you to expand on that, because there are quite a lot of balls in the air at the moment. We're consulting with the Auckland community on targeted rate application, funding source. We're discussing regional fuel tax, possible funding source. We're discussing ATAP with government, possible funding source. So there are a lot of balls in the air. None of them have landed at this stage.
I understand that, but I thought it would be quite useful to inform the councillors around this table the severity of our funding gap, and if it is much greater than what we've been bandying around, that will have an impact, I'd like to think, on the way some people may consider voting on whether it's 2.5 or 3.5 or 2, etc. And I just think it should be tightened up. But I don't know what Mr. Quinn, do you believe it should be tightened?
Could I invite Councillor Clough to draft something up? I'm very willing to accept it, to emphasise the significance of the funding gap. We already know that we have, from memory, it's $4 billion in the first decade. These numbers have been refreshed just in the last few months, and we've gone from 17 billion out to 19.7 billion. On updated numbers. That's overall capital expenditure that could be hinged back to this council. I do not envisage it being hinged back to the ratepayers of Auckland. There's going to have to be, without doubt, alternative means of funding this city to accommodate those $20 billion number approximately. So you asked for a response from
Well, I'm just happy for Jim to actually just come up with something that helps him, that is going to,
Well, I think my response on that would be that the purpose of the future urban land supply is to signal the quantum, but to signal the 30 years. And as you know, our financial planning is 3 to 10 years. So I think we need to deal with these in steps. This is to identify and signal to the market where they can expect land to be released and what the constraints are, so that if we want to have a debate about moving those constraints because of growth or slowdown or whatever it is, then we know what it is, the constraints are that we've got to move and what it will cost. There's a whole separate piece of work which will come through committees like yours in terms of then how do we unleash that through any number of mechanisms which we've discussed. This wasn't.
Yeah, I understand, but given that most of the mechanisms we're looking at to actually try and solve our long-term issues are actually reasonably long-term, and we've got huge pressing pressure now, basically, effectively over the next several years, and that's where the crunch is going to come, and you only need to look at our debt to revenue ratio and that, and we know we're really sitting there pretty damn tight for the next really 3 or 4 years. It's going to be extremely difficult.
Absolutely agree.
My second point was a question really, is where is Watercare transport, everyone feeding into this, Panuku feeding into this? Because we've talked about it, overarching monitoring group and whatever, but we've also got the CCO family there already. Surely they are already having a big say in this, in the background.
Amanda, the role of our CCOs?
Through you, Mr Chair, Watercare, Auckland Transport, NZTA, other parts of council have been involved all the way through this process, from the first Future Urban Land Supply Strategy through to the review, the refresh. We have Watercare and Auckland Transport here with us today. So yeah, they are fully bought into this.
And I know Panuku's involved more in the brownfield development side of things, but I mean, I believe they're doing a little bit of a refresh on their categories as well, and who sits where. So they are obviously fairly involved, because this is actually just greenfield stuff.
And that possible expansion of the Panuku remit will be subject to our decision making. At this stage, they understand the parameters of their remit.
Okay, well,
that might change, but that's subject to our...
I'm happy to leave it then if it's...
I'll go to Mayor Goff.
Yeah, if I can just pick up, Mr Chairman, on Councillor Clowe's comments, because I think they're very relevant. We've got obvious sources, such as rating and borrowing, and we've equally got obvious limitations on the extent to which we can use those sources of revenue. Borrowing in terms of our debt to revenue ratio, which I think some of the central government officials are still having trouble getting their head around. Rating, if you consider a 1% rate increase raises you about $15 million, and we're talking about billions of dollars. You can see the limitations on ratings, and I think every councillor around the table understands that. But there are 2 live options that we are in the process of discussing with government at the moment. Road pricing is one of those, whereas the government has not agreed to a road tax, which would have seemed an obvious interim measure to many of us. They are not ruling out tolling, they are not ruling out congestion charging, and indeed a working party is set up to look at that. We're also looking at the $1 billion housing infrastructure fund. And it's clear that when we look at those numbers, 1 billion over 5 cities isn't very much, but there is still a problem with the Housing Infrastructure Fund, is that if it's a debt, it applies to our debt to revenue ratio. But that's an ongoing discussion, and I'll be meeting with the Prime Minister this Friday to continue that discussion. So I don't think we need the resolution now, but the purpose behind the resolution is I think obvious to everybody around this table. We have got some severe challenges, given the fact that we are growing by 45,000 people a year, and we can't handle that with our existing mechanisms for revenue raising. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Walker. Oh, Councillor Walker, by the way, you expressed a concern about the provision of parks and community infrastructure, and there wasn't enough of it. There's actually a workshop you may or may not be aware of that Councillor Hulse is convening quite shortly in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think, to address that very issue. These are the latest updated numbers, and of course, as the monitoring program puts in place, those numbers will be reviewed and I would suggest inflated. But your second question, Councillor Walker?
Also, I've got a question around the table around page 38, which is around the cost of the infrastructure, and other speakers have discussed that. Is it possible, at least in future agendas, to bolt out, to add on what the deficit is? What is the difference between what we can do now versus what we need? Because this is wishful thinking as it stands, and we need to know that. And my view, Mr Chair, is that at every opportunity, in every report, we should be indicating what the difference is between our wishful thinking and realism in terms of what our present funding tools give us.
Okay, look, it is a strategy rather than a future urban land supply, future thinking.
Well,
And
strategy's useless unless you can actually complete
Amanda
it.
or David, can you just expand on what you've probably already told us about, you know, how you have arrived at those budgets and where they sit in terms of LTPs in the future? I think that's the nub of the problem.
Well, in terms of arriving at these numbers, they've really been built up from the grassroots, you know, from quite detail right up and then built up to these figures. So, for instance, the Transport for Future Urban Growth, now known as Supporting Growth, work was done over the last 18 months or so and has, I guess, drilled into the sorts of network or elements that would be required to service these areas, and then calculated what those elements would cost, and that's been done across all of the infrastructures and then added up. So it's been quite a lot of technical work that's gone into these numbers. They've also been inflation adjusted and taking into account land prices. You want to...
And that's, I suppose, we built it up. It was always the intention, I suppose, of the strategy to feed into the long-term plans. I mean, that's the essence of the financial budgeting for council. So we always anticipated that that work would flow into those processes. So in terms of, I suppose, shortfalls and things, I mean, that is the process that determines that in reality. So that's where we got to.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair.
Lastly.
Just last question, and again it goes to this presentation, and that is, in an instance where you've got a box like this and we're dealing with significant numbers, can you provide the drill down references so that a member of the public, myself, anybody, can figure out just where things have come from?
Look, I'm going to call it
that could be done digitally.
Because that's the sort of question that should have been asked at the workshop, and we thrashed this out at the workshop. So I take your point. I don't think there's an answer for that question, and I'd like to move on. Councillor Lilly?
Yes, my question really relates to the public engagement process. There is an assumption all the way through this work of inevitability of the high growth scenario, as if there is absolutely no human choice or societal choice in the outcome. I am concerned, as I guess everyone will be, about the affordability of these growth scenarios. The central government, in terms of these matters, urban development and so on, takes a hands-off approach by and large, but it is actively involved in immigration policies which are at record levels. My question is that while we have a list of Auckland, if you like, Auckland Council family-related infrastructure, the central government infrastructure, hospitals, schools, police, other services, power grids, and so on, I don't see costed in, but altogether this is going to be enormous. And my question is, why can't we scope a lower growth scenario, which would be able to be achieved if the government were to change its, at least its immigration policy settings for Auckland, and became more proactive, a future government became more proactive in encouraging a more balanced growth and development over the country. I just would like to see some thought given to other possible scenarios.
Let's hear from Amanda.
These ones, that this high growth is not entirely inevitable at all.
Amanda, how have you arrived at these growth projections as opposed to using other scenarios? And if you could also back us up and tell us what growth projections historically have we considered and outgrown?
Through the Chair, I suppose it's worth reiterating that the future urban land supply strategy is a component of a greater strategy, I suppose, the Auckland Plan. So the trajectory point started in the Auckland Plan. So the assumptions that were adopted in the Auckland Plan are the starting point for this strategy. So in effect, that's the path dependency. So in this strategy, we have taken those assumptions that were adopted in the Auckland Plan and applied them. I suppose the broader question, which is not really one for me to ask and answer in this role for this strategy, is whether or not you have different scenarios as a part of a future Auckland Plan. But this strategy, I just want to reaffirm, takes the assumptions from the adopted Auckland Plan in 2012.
Thank you.
I think it's also important to say this plan assumes we've got a long record now of forecasting lower than actually occurs, so we need to learn from that. But if all this does is signal when this land would be available and when the investment would be made. If there was a slowdown because of policy shift or global events or whatever, then clearly both us and government and others who would invest would slow down with that, because the market isn't going to be ready to build anyway if the pressure stops. So I think you can be confident that we would accommodate a slowdown. The main thing is we're planning for what we're expecting, I think. So.
Thank you. Look, I'm aware that some questions are actually comments and we haven't moved the motion, so I'd like to put it on the table. I'll move it. If I have a second, and the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Cashmore, thank you. And can I just address the gaps? We've got a couple of gaps, so I appreciate Councillor Quack's offering to do this work, and Councillor Newman, thank you. Along with myself and the Independent Māori Statutory Board member, Leanne Namani. Thank you, Leanne. We've got a couple of gaps there.
Happy to put my hand up.
Councillor Walker, thank you. Do we have one more? And Councillor Cooper? I've got a full house. Can I leave it at Councillor Cooper?
One more.
And thank you.
Inside straight.
It's a good team. And just on that note, members, I consider this as a decision of this body and not of local boards, and I support the recommendation of the staff that it be decided entirely by this body. I don't think it's appropriate that local boards are involved at this stage, and if you look at the agenda, they have been involved quite deeply up to date. We had some from memory, I think 4 or 5 boards represented at our workshop on this. There have been briefings with boards in clusters, I believe, and the dialogue continues. But ultimately, the decision-making rests with this body here, this planning committee, and the governing body members. So I've got a full house there, appreciate that. And now I'll go to question or comment from Councillor Newman.
A question at this stage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just my questions now relate to the public engagement process from para 30 in the report. And we're talking about what appears to be a sort of hybrid consultation where we're talking to those people who previously participated in 4 public meetings. And then we're going to have, well, obviously we're going to advertise it through through the Shape Auckland website. Are we also going to be contacting the submitters that provided evidence to the IHP on 016, 017? Because there were more than just land developers. And it would seem to me that in relation to all of those locations, that they were quite contested, and that there'll be obviously the land developers that wanted to submit, and there'll be other people that did submit as well to the IHP. Are we going to make contact with them?
We can. I mean, I can confirm that, but to you later. But we're definitely contacting the people that made submissions to the current Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, so the previous round of consultation. But we can certainly look into adding those people as well that made submissions to the unitary plan relating to this topic.
And just one follow-up, Mr. Chair, I don't want to labour the point, but the recommendation is to establish a deliberations panel. Is that deliberations panel, are we going to have a hearing as well, or we're just going to receive the submissions and have an in-house debate about it and come up with some position in relation to the proposed sequence? I mean, is there going to be a forum for the submitters to come and reflect back and provide additional information supplementary to their written evidence or written submissions?
Amanda?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're not intending to have formal hearings. It'll be a process of the deliberations panel considering the feedback and bringing that feedback and recommendations back to the Planning Committee.
Could you recount when we undertook the first strategy, how we undertook the process of engaging with Aucklanders at that time?
So the process was almost the same as this. Have your say events, inviting feedback, and we also had information on websites, so we use social media as well, and the feedback was collated, summarised, and in the case of the local board feedback, verbatim comments given to the panel. We took the panel through the feedback systematically, and the panel recommended amendments back to the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Newman?
Well, I mean, I wasn't involved in the first round, Mr. Chair, but it seems to me that the local boards are going to come and present to the panel. Is that correct? The local boards will all be invited?
Amanda, I don't believe it's about having a hearing. That would be a hearing.
No.
So we will, I think it's the pattern pretty much equal to before, which we had very positive feedback on from those in the north, west and south and a lot of others. And it would be written material, so we'll receive written feedback from parties, including local boards, and the panel will consider that written feedback and also the advice of staff in the staff having considered that feedback. Councillor Lee.
My question relates to the executive summary, and I think it's very important because there seems to be a little bit of blurring between the Auckland plan, the spatial plan for Auckland, which is its legal name, and the unitary plan, which is the very important RMA plan. Now, as I understand it, the 400,000 new homes didn't come out of the Auckland plan, but out of the unitary plan, given the million scenario. I'm concerned that we, in getting on with our work, factor in the council's own evidence that the household formation rate is likely to be closer to be 3.1 than the 2.4 preferred by the unitary plan panel. Having 2.4 meant that you're required to make even more land available for separate houses. I grew up in a household of 7, colleagues to my left and right, 11 and 6 respectively. I don't believe that those levels have changed that dramatically if you look out into the real world, and therefore we have to be careful and rigorous in terms of the data we are working with, lest we make the costs of this infrastructure or projected costs even more frightening than they are, and I agree that they are. I just would like a little bit more rigour on this basic data. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers?
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just had two specific questions
timing,
around
mate.
townships of Kimu and Warkworth. If I could just direct the officers' attentions to page 65, some figures on page 65 compared to some figures on page 55.
Yeah, our agenda.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I think that's page 23,
23.
and 13, sorry. Of your
So you're looking
document.
at, on 65 is the original strategy
Yep.
of 15?
Yep.
And you're reconciling those with those on which page, Councillor?
On our agenda 55,
On
Mr Chair.
65 and 55?
Yeah. So just so I'm clear on my own understanding, for example, it says there, it's got some figures there for Kimu and Huapai sitting at 9,200. Are you all right?
Sorry, we're struggling a bit to find
Payment?
that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll do a catch-up here. So, members, we're looking at page 65, which is the current strategy that we confirmed some time ago.
Yes.
And we're reconciling with page 55
So that,
of the strategy as well.
The one says 6
Okay.
to 7.
I think that on your document that might be page 23 and 13. So the question is just around, first one around Kimu Huapai Riverhead. It says dwellings 8,140 to 9,200. Then when I go back to page 55 and I just look at the same figures, they're lower, right? So that's the gist of my question. Why are they lower? And related to that is Warkworth. Warkworth on page 65, the number isn't actually shown, but I've been working to a growth figure of 22,000 there. That's kind of our community's understanding. And when I go back to page 55, we're looking at a figure more around 7,500. So have they actually dropped, or am I misreading the information?
Through you, Mr Chair, if I could deal with the Warkworth one, the 22,000 figure is people. 22,000 people translates to a dwelling figure of around 8,000 dwellings. And with the Kimu Huapai Riverhead figure there in the two tables, you've picked up an anomaly there. That is incorrect.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Should
that's
it
just
be a
an
higher
anomaly.
figure, do you think? Or,
So that's in the current future urban land supply strategy, and the figure that's in the report for Kimu Huapai is the most up to date and will be put into the new revised future urban land supply strategy.
Well, thank you very much. If I can just clarify for Warkworth there, because I was under understanding it was 22,000 new houses and 55,000 new people. You're saying that's incorrect? You're saying it's 8,000 new houses.
So that whatever the figure in the current report, so it'll be around 8,000 dwellings in Warkworth, and times by 2.5, whatever the per household figure we're using is, gets you the total number of people in Warkworth, including the current resident population. So in the Auckland plan, it talked about 20,000 people, but with the additional future urban areas that have been added in the unitary plan, there's provision for more dwellings, which means more people.
Right.
So that's where that sort of 22 upwards comes from.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Keen eye for the detail. That's good to have around the table. Appreciate that. So, members, I've moved it. Just speaking briefly, I probably won't dwell on the funding issues, but because I think they've been well canvassed by Councillor Clow and the Mayor, and they are significant. They are phenomenal challenges. So this body of work builds on the huge amount of work we've landed or coming into land finally, hopefully, the Auckland Unitary Plan, subject to court appeals and the Higher Environment Court. But it's it's no silver bullet. This is another very important cog in the wheel, and there are some more cogs that we need to sharpen up on. But what this brings to Auckland for the first time, I think, is it confirms a 30-year pipeline of land supply that we've never had before. There's never been a plan like this before. This helps alleviate the lurching from the anywhere, any time, at any cost response that Auckland has suffered from. And I think over the decades I've been living in Auckland and reflecting now with the knowledge that I've built up, that's cost us quite dearly not planning for Auckland's long future. What is critical in this body of work is that it has wrapped around it a very stringent monitoring program, and we will be seeing those numbers flowing through 6 monthly and annually just to see where we're sitting, updating the information, and that monitoring program that will allow us to trigger early release, later release, and we can do it in a nuanced way. So that is a critical component of this. Here we're seeing Auckland Unitary Plan plus Future Urban Land Supply Strategy. If we focus on the dwellings, and I take the point of Councillor Hulson, it's extremely important that we don't just focus on dwellings, but if we look at the dwelling numbers, we're looking at around just over 420,000 feasible dwellings. They are only enabled if we can close those funding gap issues. Short term, 4 billion, long term, heading towards 20 billion that we're hearing today. This provides overall significantly improved integration that was lacking prior, and it makes it also a lot clearer to those that own land on the outskirts. It makes it a lot clearer to those that are our own infrastructure providers, NZTA, Auckland Transport, but also to other infrastructure providers like electricity, energy transmission, Transpower, local connectors like Vector, Mercury, etc. Not forgetting government institutions themselves, and I think Councillor Lee, you made that point, government institutions primarily in the health and education sector, who obviously, who have in the past, struggled to plan for their education infrastructure and health infrastructure in Auckland. So we go from 11,000 in the current Future Urban Land Supply Strategy up to 15,000. We haven't talked much today about the 1,700 hectares that we're identifying this time round that we didn't identify in the first time in the current strategy around the rural settlements, the coastal settlements. That's been highlighted. We've picked that up and we've made some accommodation in those areas, again with triggers. It's all about sequencing. This is no helter-skelter release of land. So members, I think we've come a long way. We've got another little journey to make, and that is to check this off with our communities finally, take their feedback and land this Future Urban Land Supply Strategy in the next couple of months. Where I started, I commended our staff, and I really want that to be echoed back to all the staff, all the CCOs, NZTA as well, beyond council of course, AT, Healthy Waters, and I know a lot of those people are here today, and you can be proud of the work that you've brought here. I'm extremely proud of the in-depth analysis that all of our teams have given. There might be some gaps. There's no perfect document that lands on this table, but I'm pretty confident that we've polished this one up to be 95, 98% perfect. That's a glowing score. So thank you, team, and I commend this to all of you to support, and I have an opportunity to speak to this Councillor Hulse, who did sterling work in the early days of this work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And can I just say, I think this is coming to a really good point, and thank you for the chance to comment. I just think your words are absolutely on point, because this now bringing the the pieces of work together is the absolute perfect time to be having a well-informed and rational discussion with our community as we lead into the LTP next year. And I think the points that Councillor Clow was raising as our Chair of Finance linked in with the work that you're doing here, which is actually the most important piece of work that we're doing, what's going to go where and how do we pay for it. If we start to bring those two together in people's minds, we have got the picture, the numbers that are scary, but they're honest numbers, and they're numbers that we need to engage with. And I think, Mr. Chair, that the more we make this available to our community in that joined up way, this is what we're doing for the next 20 years, this is what it's going to cost, this is what we have to think about. And I disagree a bit with the Mayor. I don't think that we're thinking widely enough. Every bit that we raise the rates by allows for greater and more sensible and long-term borrowing. So that actually raises our debt equity. So, 1% on rates doesn't just raise 15 million or whatever. It actually raises the debt equity level that we need to deal with, which is actually what we need to deal with here when we look at these long-term figures. And to do any less is actually robbing our community of their future. And we've seen that. You make that point yourself, Mr. Chair. Ill-conceived and badly thought through and lack of long-term planning is why we're in the schmozzle that we are now. We've undone the complexity of the knot, and we actually need to dignify it with putting enough money in place to do it right. So leading into the refresh of the Auckland plan and then the LTP, we're well aligned. So well done, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hulse. I don't have any other speakers, so I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Contrary, no, and declare that carried. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, are you happy to proceed till 12:30? I think we're all good for 12:30? I think we'll carry on with our business then, and we'll go to the next item. And this is on page 75 of your agenda, this is the East-West Link Auckland Council submission. I'll ask John Dogood to introduce it, and then I'll ask the Deputy Chair of the Committee, Councillor Denise Lee, to introduce it from a political vantage point.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors and members of the IMSB. So, as you're aware, NZTA have been working on this project for quite some time. They've presented to the governing body on a number of occasions, and we have a staff project team going across Panuku, Auckland Transport, the wider organisation to analyse this project and prepare a submission to lodge in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So we're getting to the sharp end of things in terms of this phase, the submissions phase. The applications for the notice of requirement and numerous resource consents were publicly notified about a fortnight ago. There is a 4-week submission period. I'll talk to that a bit more in a second. So staff have been working with the political reference group appointed by the Planning Committee last November. We have local board representatives on that working group as well as members of the Planning Committee. I think we've had 2 or 3 workshops and staff have received some direction from the reference group in terms of framing up the council submission. So on the screen now we just have those timelines that I spoke to. So 22nd of February was when the applications were notified. Both the notice of requirement and the various resource consents. Submissions were called for. Submissions closed 22nd of March. Clearly council is looking to make a submission, and a number of other parties will clearly make submissions. May to July is when council will be preparing its evidence or its case to present to the Board of Inquiry. The government, the ministers have appointed members to a board to hear submissions and make a decision on these applications. And we expect that there may well be mediation, conferencing prior to the hearing commencing. So it may well be that the Board of Inquiry directs certain submitters and the Council, NZTA, to enter into mediation or expert conferencing where specialists in noise or ecology might get together to try and narrow the issues before a hearing. That may or may not happen, but we think something this complex could well go down the path of mediation and conferencing. So I guess that leads into the agenda report, where one of the things that we're seeking is that the political reference group that was established in November has a role beyond the submission period, but right through the process, so that if there is mediation or conferencing, then we have a group of elected members that we can seek direction from. So the slides now, in terms of the ongoing delegations, we will need to move swiftly, as I've mentioned, establish the Council's position. This is post the lodgement of the submission, so we are seeking in the report that there is an extension of the political reference group beyond or throughout the entire process. Also, in terms of finalising the Council's submission in the next couple of weeks, we feel that there is a need for a majority vote to be established in the situation where we might not have all members of the planning committee who are on the reference group in agreement. We seek in the report that there's a majority of 3 political reference group members from the planning committee can finalise the council submission. At this point in time, local boards are, the 2 main local boards affected by the applications are still considering whether they include their views in the council submission or not, but we think that they are quite interested in that, the ability to include a local board section within the council submission. So at this point in time, the other thing to speak to is there was a resolution of the committee in November to seek that the Environmental Protection Authority, who are assisting the Board of Inquiry, allow for a 2-month submission period, not a 1-month submission period. The agenda report does include some advice from our lawyers that the Environmental Protection Agency and the Board of Inquiry are unable to extend the submission period. The Board can accept or can potentially accept late submissions. So there is that option available for the Board of Inquiry, and perhaps that's something that the Council might consider supporting. Once the submission period closes, if there are late submissions that come in, the Board can potentially accept those late submissions, but the Board and the EPA, Environmental Protection Authority, can't extend the submission period. So we're just seeking that you note that advice. Great. So the next part of our presentation is Matt, who's our principal planner, who's been coordinating a lot of this work across numerous council departments and the CCOs, to really just highlight in the space of 5 minutes the key issues that staff and consultants have identified to date. So, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Go for it, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, is that all? Yeah. Hello everyone. So Matt Gouge, the project manager for Council's submission on the East-West Link project and a planner within the Plans and Places team. So as you'll see through the report that we've sent through, it's a long alignment. So we're looking at about an 8 kilometre long alignment. It's a $1.5 to $1.8 billion roading project. This will be no news for some of you who have been involved in the political reference group that we've set up for this project. Through the expert assessment, which is ongoing and coming in at the moment, we have identified some key areas of interest along this alignment. So it extends from Nelson Street here on the west, along the northern foreshore of the Mangere Inlet, through up past Mutukaroa or Hamlin's Hill and onto Tip Top Corner, where it joins State Highway 1 and comes down as far as Princes Street here. So in terms of the key areas that we've identified, so point 12 on the committee report there is the area of Nelson Street, and looking particularly at the development potential and placemaking potential of this area, which has been identified through a number of community groups as well as a key feature or a key opportunity for this project. Panuku are very interested in this part of the project, particularly around the development of the port area there. And so we're looking at things such as better connections through to the port area to enable that future development, cycling and walking connectivity and enabling that both along the foreshore and towards Onehunga Township. And also more cosmetic features such as removal of the transmission lines there to open up that landscape and to provide a more higher quality open space there. So that's some of the comments that are coming through. In terms of the foreshore area, which is here, so the key features along here are the stormwater and leachate collection ponds, which also double as landscape features and parks and open space. So these areas here are artificially made headlands intended to replicate the natural coastline of that area, which has undergone significant reclamation since the mid-1800s. So there is an opportunity there. However, there is also a operational cost associated with these, and our stormwater and closed landfill teams are looking at those in terms of any additional cost that may be occurred to the council in the future, and we're working closely with the NZTA on that. The third key issue is around Anns Creek, which is an area of significant ecological quality. So you've got there all the crosses, and the little dots represent marine and terrestrial SEAs, or significant ecological areas. So bird wading habitats, and also areas of high quality vegetation or indigenous vegetation. And there's also what they call ONFs, so outstanding natural features, which are larval rock formations. So they've come down from a number of the volcanoes, most notably One Tree Hill. And so the confluence of those two has resulted in some pretty unique vegetation in that area. And so our ecologists are very keen to protect that site because of that uniqueness. And indeed, it's gone through, I believe, about 20 years of litigation just in that area, which has recently finished with regards to these features. So the council experts are very sensitive in protecting what we've got and enhancing what we've got there. So that leads off to point 14 there. That's finishing point 14. In terms of the point 15 there, another key point which I just raise the council's attention to is the notion of community groups. So in this area, the Onehunga Enhancement Society and the Onehunga Business Association are proposing an alternative to the NZTA proposal, which is summarised in this image here. So some of you may be familiar with Taumanu Reserve, which was recently created there to the north. The proposal is to actually extend that area of reclamation all the way down to the port, and then along the northern foreshore of the inlet, and in order to create a more livable, walkable space and for those amenity qualities. There's also additional bridges which have been proposed by the community group to effectively move that traffic away from the Nelson Street interchange area, this area here, and so in an attempt to make it a more attractive place for recreation, enhance the community's ability to access the water and so forth, all of which are key areas of focus for our experts currently, albeit by other means. So it's needless to say, with some of these matters proposed, there are concerns from ecologists, our experts in coastal morphology, and the way that the water moves around that area, sedimentation and the like. So we are looking closely at that. Our parks and open space people see merit in terms of that. However, there are ecological concerns and or potentially transport concerns as well. So we're keeping a watching brief on that, and work is ongoing. So those are the key sort of aspects, and from this moment I'll hand back to John.
Right, maybe just one final comment in conclusion. We have engaged with mana whenua over the last few months. NZTA have engaged with mana whenua over a much longer period of time, Initially, we were engaging with primarily operational or technical representatives from Mana Whenua, and we had a wide range of issues that individuals from the different iwi hapu raised, but not necessarily mandated by the iwi as a whole. So we had a governance hui last week to try and get more of a governance mandate for the feedback that we'd received. And really, what it boils down to is probably two main issues. First, that the council needs to be aware of. First of all, there is a treaty settlement claim over the Manukau Harbour that is still sitting there with the Office of Treaty Settlement, so that is absolutely critical to Mana Whenua at a governance level. What that means in practical terms, we're still working through in terms of what we might say in our submission or recommend to the political reference group on that front, but that is an absolute fundamental from Mana Whenua point of view. The second one is that there seem to be some cultural effects or adverse effects that NZTA has yet to properly address. But to actually get that mandated as a single perspective is quite challenging. So, but there are still outstanding cultural issues around the Anns Creek area and the Haupua crater, and even potentially around the foreshore issue that are still outstanding from Mana Whenua point of view. Some Mana Whenua entities are looking to make a submission, but that's yet to be confirmed. So that's what we can say on that front.
Thank you, John. That's concluding your presentation. Yep. Thank you. Appreciate that. I think it's a considering the journey we've been on in this, it would be good to have a political viewpoint, and I'll allow Councillor Denise Lee, who's been leading this on behalf of Council, to say a few words.
Thank you, Chair Darby. It certainly is a big project with some big issues and challenging, but there's also, as you outlined, John, some opportunities as well. I'd like to thank the Working Party for your work so far. I don't think we've really reached peak in any regard, and that Working Party comprises myself, Chair Darby, Councillors Newman, Lee and Quacks, and we also have two representatives from the Maungakiekie Tamaki Local Board, Chair Josephine Bartley, Bernie Diver and Lydia from the Mangere Otahu Board. So we've put in hours already, but would pale in comparison to what the staff have done. Matt, you must be a middle child, a peacemaker, a mediator, because what you've done in terms of bringing together members of the council family has been nothing short of phenomenal. It's, as I said, a very, very big project and cuts across just about every arm of our council family, as you could imagine. The report that we've got in front of us, colleagues, obviously does not go into detail, because you would be here for the next 3 days if you were to listen to all that we have in our Working Party sessions so far. So what you've got here is a really helpful brief outline in paragraph 6 on the issues and the opportunities. They're the key issues that we're identifying. That's not all the issues, but definitely the key issues. We're needing support from you for the recommendations around delegations from here. So like the smaller unitary plan group that are traversing the appeals journey, we're going to need something like that in regards to this east-west. We'll have to be nimble and responsive. And again, I'd like to thank those members of the Working Party that are prepared to do that. Signing up for 3 members, essentially as a quorum from this planning committee, is a good move. We all can't be there all the time, but there are those of us that have shown some serious commitment to this point, and I think it's a good practical move to have 3 members from this committee as a quorum going forward. I'd like to make a quick comment on the thank you for your work on attempting for an 8-week submission period. We obviously did get that legal advice. It was not possible. Chair, I would like to move, but also reserve space for a comment around the extension of submissions, as John's made. But my last comment before I come to the question would be the delicate balance for us. folks, between technical response and a placemaking response. After all, people live all along, well, specifically the east and the west part of this project, and there's going to be some serious impact to those who live here, and it is our duty to ensure that residents are factored into our decision making, plain and simple. I'd like to think that paragraph 12 summarises quite well some of those it is granted in relation to the Onehunga community, but you've got the wording a strong sense. We need to reinforce a strong sense of local identity, improving amenity and improving connections. So they're good words, and words that we need to pay very close attention to as we listen to community interests, and then agree, as we have, that the project in fact does need to happen. So with that, Chair, I'd like to move. I believe Councillor Newman is the second.
Yep, we do. We have a move in the Deputy Chair and Councillor Newman. It's on the table. Thank you, Councillor Denise Lee, for that introduction and background, and echo the sentiment about the phenomenal contribution of our team and particularly our local boards that have participated in this as well. I have a question or comment from Councillor Clow, then Councillor Mike Lee.
Yeah, two questions. Point 15 about the Onehunga Enhancement Society, and that the $300 million bill that could end up costing, where would that lie if that was to find favour? Would that be part of the government contribution, or would we have to find $300 million?
John, if the design was amended in line with the community group's design, where would those costs lie?
I mean, the easy answer to say is it would lie with the government NZTA, but they may well wish to have a discussion with council around that if there was strong council support for that alternative. But at the moment, it's, as you know, it's an NZTA project fully funded by NZTA, so that would be the starting point.
So the council officers' the staff, professional staff, lack of enthusiasm for the OBA and TOE's alternative, is that based on obviously ecological and all sorts of other reasons, and has not been totally necessary?
It's the potential additional adverse effects, such as on visual landscape, on the geology of the Tuffering, the Haupua crater. So it's those negatives, and we're not seeing strong transport or place-making benefits that would outweigh those negatives. But it is an ongoing discussion. We're still engaging with Panuku, with the local community to explore that in NZTA. So in parallel to finalising the council submission, there is a positive, constructive process to continue engaging with the Onehunga Business Association and the TOEs. Yeah.
Okay. Second question is, Kiwi Rail presented to us last year and highlighted the huge gap. I think it was 600 million, could have been higher, that they see for enhancement of rail in that area in order to help them long term deliver a better service into Auckland. No doubt they're doing their own submissions, etc. Have we been supportive of Kiwi Rail's proposals or to try and improve things there? Because they sort of indicated to us that was their biggest challenge in Auckland, was actually improving things there, and that's obviously around the Annie's Creek area.
We have an update.
Yeah, unfortunately I don't have enough information on that to really comment. The improvements that you're referring to for Kiwi Rail?
Maybe the Deputy Mayor can help me here, but it was Kiwi Rail certainly identified that they just need to enhance facilities and tracks, etc., into there, whether that's laying extra tracks, because obviously we have the inland ports sitting there among other things, and then long term there's clearly the possibility, and this is long term, of a track extension through to Avondale in order to coordinate, for anything that may happen with the Northland Port, etc., etc.
Unfortunately, I can't comment further. It's something that maybe Auckland Transport would need to give a report back on, or an update.
I appreciate that, because I just think we should be obviously supportive, is probably what I'm saying, yes, because that's talking about long-term planning, which is important.
I think that was around the third and possibly fourth main line, and also the access into Metroport, and the rearrangement of their land around the toll site, the main freight site, and a few of those things. There's nothing I see in this design that, and a lot of it's at that sort of 2D level still, that would impede that, and we certainly are, and Auckland Transport, supportive of Kiwi Rail, because we need to enable Metro Rail to flow and also get the freight task done, and they are not compatible with constant growth in both of them on the same track. So but that's a longer game.
It was the third line, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mickley?
Yes, I'd just like to make some comments if I can, Mr Chairman. It's interesting, having dealt with the enormous projected infrastructure costs that we are faced with into the future, that we are now dealing with this east-west link, which I have to say, being frank, has never really been strategically justified, certainly not due the priority it has been given. But nevertheless, it was included in the Auckland plan, along with the CRL and along with rail to the airport. And its political importance, rather than its strategic importance or justification, was reinforced by the former Prime Minister as a condition for supporting the CRL, that there must be sign up to the East-West link. And the problem with the East-West link, due to very successful lobbying, it had a catchy name long before it had an alignment and long before it had any sort of justification or business case. But there we are. I was appointed to this working party, and I confess I have had other commitments and not attended. And part of that, I confess also, is that I was absolutely gutted over the Christmas holiday period before we started our work that AT and NZTA, as part of this project, had removed the Nielsen Street overbridge at Onehunga, thereby blocking more or less permanently any option for a linkage from Onehunga through Mangere to the airport. Anyway, be that as it may, there are other concerns that have come up. To be honest with you, given it was inevitable and going to be pushed through anyway, I haven't expended energy on it. But the more I've seen, and I have been briefed by officers on it, the more I see and hear about it, the more of a mess it's likely to be. And I do really think we need to look at the alternative options. To be honest, we come back to the original justification. The only commercial justification really is for the shareholders in the Port of Tauranga Inland Port. It's essentially a gift from the ratepayers of Auckland to those people. But in terms of the environmental impacts, they seem to be major, and whether we can keep on doing that to the Manukau Harbour in the 21st century is something that we really need to think long and hard about. So I'm quite happy to rejoin activities, because it'll be on my conscience if it turns out to be a complete mess, and maybe we can try and improve things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Denisley?
Thanks. I'm just going to add, I was remiss by my apologies, IMSB member Tau Hinari, for your involvement in that working party as well, and my apologies for that. I'd also like to underscore your comments earlier, John, about the constructive dialogue with the Onehunga Business Association and the Onehunga Enhancement Society, and specifically their dialogue with Panuku Development Auckland, given that this particular area is in our top transform category. There is definitely a robust discussion going around, and of course the implications of this transport project for that transform categorisation. My question for you is around, and you've raised it already, around that extension of submissions. So can you just clarify, because I've read the letter from the legal rep, is there in fact power that can be granted to accept late submissions, or is it that it's thought there could be?
Yeah, he does mention, Gerald Lanning from Simpson Grierson has attached to the report, that it's untested, and so I guess what he's saying is there's legal arguments either way as to whether the Board of Inquiry is able to use Section 37 of the RMA to allow for late submissions, but he's noting that boards of inquiry have used Section 37 to do that in the past. So on that basis, this board may well be willing to do it, and the council may well be willing to support that in some way, shape or form. Through a letter to the board, perhaps after the submission period closes, just saying if there are late submissions, council does not object. The only caution there would be the later the submissions are allowed, the less time, because there is a statutory clock ticking. The Board of Inquiry has to finish its business by a certain date. So if there are some comprehensive late submissions accepted, it doesn't give other parties a decent chance to look at them before we're into hearings. So there's just a bit of a caution around that, but it wouldn't
You're either cutting into submitters' time or cutting into the board's time.
It starts cutting into the board's time,
yep,
and the time that other submitters will have to prepare to respond to these late submissions.
So if we were to conceptually go down that line of inquiry, are you saying that the optimum time for us would be to wait until submissions close and then request, or would there be a manner in which we could give a heads up or seek more information from the board around possibilities? And then I note in the letter that NZTA would have to give agreement.
Well, again, it's in that part of the advice, it says either there's an exceptional circumstance or the applicant NZTA agrees. So it's not that my reading of the advice is that it's one or the other. So NZTA doesn't necessarily have to agree if there's an exceptional circumstance. So if the board's convinced there's an exceptional circumstance and is willing to use Section 37 and perhaps test the legality of that, then it's quite possible that the board can accept late submissions. Even my reading of it is without NZTA's agreement. So in terms of, you asked about the timing, I have given that some thought. I guess the board certainly wouldn't make a decision to accept late submissions, I doubt, before the submission period is even closed. That would be a bit odd, because then it's essentially just encouraging late submissions, isn't it? So that's why I guess if there is to be some correspondence from council or indication from council, it probably wouldn't make sense to do it until the submission period is actually closed.
Chair, I suggest that we traverse this at the next political reference group.
Yep.
And talk through the pros and the cons and the need, or otherwise.
I think the other thing to think about, though, is the other side of that coin is if a lot of work's been done and you've assumed you'll get it and it's not got, then you've wasted that effort. So I think you do need to have a really good look at it from both sides of that coin.
Let's do that. Thank you. Councillor Newman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I echo other comments that have been made in relation to the work that has been undertaken by the officers, which has been very good. And it's a very challenging piece of work, and a lot of time has been expended so far, and a lot more time will be expended over the next 9 months or so, I'm sure. And also, Mr. Chair, I also want to acknowledge Councillor Lee, who has been a very good steward in relation to this particular piece of work. It's a very challenging topic, challenging for the ward councillor, but challenging in terms of the wider planning implications. So acknowledge Councillor Lee. Mr. Chair, I mean, I would, two things, I suppose. Recommendation C, we're not talking about simply preparing a submission, because beyond the submissions process, there will be a process, I'm sure, of a mediation and a process with NZTA in the lead up to the inquiry, and I would imagine that the reference group is going to need to be active throughout that time, because there will no doubt be opportunities, I'm sure, given the approach that we're taking to the submissions process, to try and mediate to achieve better outcomes in terms of relief sought to offset environmental impacts, I hope, and I'm sure the staff will be working to achieve that. But this group will be required to do that particular work, Mr. Chair. The one other point that I would make with respect to paragraph 13 of the agenda, it is very important, if we are going to have a groundwater containment bund, that the relief that we seek includes an ongoing contribution by NZTA to help offset the OPEX cost associated with taking that stormwater to that location, because there are significant effects, and I see Craig McElroy coming forward so he can speak to that. But we don't want to, as a council, end up with all of the OPEX costs in perpetuity if that particular design is agreed as part of the forthcoming consent orders issued by the Board of Inquiry. The second point that I would make, and it's the last sentence in paragraph 13, concern has been raised regarding the manner in which the works will be conducted, particularly with respect to dredging of the Mangere Inlet. That means, as I understand it, the proposal is to dredge the inlet for the suspended sediment to help to construct the bund. And that is a very big issue. That's a big issue in terms of what is the nature of that sediment that's going to be dredged for the purpose of construction, and is there a better option available for that particular engineering? If we're going to have that bund system in place, is it appropriate to go and dredge the harbour for that purpose, or is that simply the cheapest option for NZTA? There is a need for this council, in my view, to push back and say, well, we need to have the very best solution here, even if it isn't the cheapest option for NZTA. So I commend the work that the officers are doing in this space. It is taking a lot of our time. I think the group is working well, and I would hope that the group will continue to have the council's confidence.
Thank you, Councillor. I have one question here, and I did ask it at the group. Do we have an updated BCR on this project? Benefit cost ratio?
Through the chair, our transport expert has looked at that information, and our economist, council's economist, David Norman, has asked for that information. It's not publicly available at the moment, so it will be forming part of our submission in terms of the assessment of alternatives, just to ensure that there's been a robust methodology and justification.
Thank you. I'll speak to this just briefly, members. And this was a project that, yes, it was identified in the Auckland plan as one of the key transport projects. It was never envisaged at that time, when the Auckland plan was considered, that there be an expressway hard against the harbour edge. It was always considered an inland route. I don't believe there was ever a view or a vision, if you could call it that, to have it hard against the harbour. This is a project not long after the Auckland plan was landed that was talked about in the vicinity of $500 million. It's now looking at a capital expenditure of some $1.8 billion. And one of the fundamental questions I asked, and that's why I asked it again here, just to have you all hear it, is unlike the CRL, this has not had the rigorous examination in terms of its BCR. It just hasn't. And I would hope that the NZTA, the Board of Inquiry, can actually articulate very, very clearly what the business case is for this road, and that all the evidence that contributes to that robust business case is as thick and lengthy as the evidence that we've had to present to support the case for the CRL. At this time, as Matt's just replied, it's hard to find. So there's two fundamentals here. Benefit cost ratio for a approaching $2 billion project. Compare that with the CRL. And also, I'd have to say, there's not many cities in the world which are laying asphalt right along and reclaiming further their harbour edge. No thinking city that I can think of. In fact, the thinking cities are ripping it out. And they are bringing people back and bringing nature back. So in some ways, I'm between a rock and a hard place on this. I chair this committee, and there's a direction that we need to take. It's an NZTA project, but it's in our patch, it's in our Auckland. You can push back so much, but I don't think we're going to have any luck pushing back entirely. We're doing our damnedest in this reference group to get the very best outcome. And I can tell you, members, we're putting in a lot of hours, councillors Denise Lee, Councillor Newman, myself and the local board members. We will keep putting in those hours
Maybe if we can get in
until we get the very best decision that the Board of Inquiry can arrive at.
Even if we're lucky to get the Pūanui.
Councillor Clough.
I came under criticism from my supporters for being a strong supporter of the Waterview network there, because I thought it was really important to complete the network, the loop of our motorway system. I also was a strong supporter of the CRL because it completes part of the loop of the rail system. So it is the issue of light rail compared to rail to the airport and beyond to Manukau. Because I, like Councillor Lee, have some major concerns. I'm a great supporter of light rail, but I'm not really supportive of light rail to the airport. I mean, have we given a rigorous examination, or have we just accepted Auckland Transport's about face last year on it won't be rail, and therefore affecting this project is putting in the infrastructure to take heavy rail across, because to me it just doesn't seem logical that we are not wanting to complete the loop of our rail system. I mean, it's not a matter of doing anything else, but why are we not completing the loop of our rail system from Onehunga to Manukau?
So,
because this is relevant, because it's relevant to the this is basically, if we turn around in 5 years' time and decide that's what we're going to do, it's going to require quite a bit more money again to reinstate and put in whatever we need, the bridges, etc., to carry rail. But I still, have we given a rigorous examination of whether it should be rail to complete the loop, so you can get on the train at Ellerslie and go to the airport without going downtown, get on light rail somewhere and then scoot off to the airport? I mean, why are we not really seriously giving it a damn good examination as why we're not completing that loop? And it does affect this project. And so I suppose my question is, are we actually in our submission just basically giving carte blanche to light rail to the airport and that's it? Is that what our submission is effectively? May not be saying explicitly, but does that mean that's what we're doing?
John, it was canvassed. Matt, you'll be aware that we asked the question of, does it take into account the alignment of mass transit in our workshops? Would you like to respond to Councillor Clough's query there?
So future-proofing light rail, it is part of the council family discussion, and indeed an intensive part of the family discussion between AT and Panuku and Auckland Council, sort of as a middle person, in terms of the extent to which it will service the future port area, or whether it will come directly across from the end of Galway Street. But either way, the submission point is clear that we are looking to future-proof rail to the airport.
Sorry, wait a minute, let's be quite clear. We are future-proofing rail to the airport?
Or trams.
Or are we doing light rail? Because I'm talking about rail. Why are we not thinking about seriously completing that rail
I just want to
loop?
come in there. That is a different discussion to what we're dealing with here in the East-West Link. The work at the moment, there are two decisions. One of the Auckland Transport Board, which Councillor Lee used to be a member of, and Councillor Fletcher, who can't be with us today, was a member of, and NZTA, and both those, the two respective boards have landed on a light rail.
Not with my agreement.
No, but the majority of the board, and the board is part of, the Auckland Transport Board is part of this council. And
Incorrectly.
that is the decision of the board, and it's the same decision of the New Zealand Transport Agency.
But it can't preempt the council.
Excuse me, point of order. I'm actually the person
I'm
involved
just going to come in
so
here.
this-
Sorry, member, Councillor Clow, but this is actually, I don't believe it's related directly to the east-west link. And we're going to, if you stay around for a briefing later in the day, as you would have received an email for, we're having a briefing on bus rapid transit and rail connections to the airport. So I think we can pick this up in that discussion in the afternoon.
So Councillor Lee was incorrect in saying, when he basically inferred before, that therefore this is a decision that effectively kills off rail to the airport as compared to light rail, because we're removing whatever structure is needed for bridge reinforcement or whatever, if we were to go down that track. Is that correct or not? Because that is relevant.
Are you able to
that is
answer
relevant to this issue. This is very relevant to this issue. We may be making, NZTA may be making a long-term serious mistake here. It could be that we end up, and I'm sorry, and Councillor Darby, I know you've travelled around in Europe, but I mean, Düsseldorf Airport, you've got rail that's within 3 kilometres or something, and then you get on a sky train from the railway. You know, so instead of taking light rail one way to the airport and then busing across to Manukau, I don't know, why don't we think seriously about completing that rail link? You know, I don't know whether that option has actually been fully explored, and I'm not aware that this council has totally endorsed Auckland Transport's position on this, because that's an LTP thing.
It has not.
Matt, are you able to answer that? So the question is not so much about protecting route access for LRT, it's any type of mass transit to the airport.
No, our understanding is that the testing has been based on Auckland Transport's preferred approach, so they don't have a concern with the east-west link as it currently stands in terms of keeping the option available for light rail, but we'd have to go back and check whether they've done any analysis on whether it causes any issues with heavy rail, but certainly in terms of light rail, that's been the focus. My recommendation would be this is something we pick up with the reference group.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just correct one thing? Protecting mass rapid transit, the decision on whether it's bus or rail, light rail, is not made yet, so that's the first issue. The heavy rail piece, the thing that drove the decision last year, as I understand it, was the need to allow Auckland International Airport to plan for its reconstruction, and the light rail versus heavy rail or mass transit other than heavy rail has a massive impact on the way they construct that. So that call needed to be made, as I understand it. That's where that came from. That's what I understand of the dynamic pieces.
And I understand that, but it should be, we might own 20% of Auckland Airport, but do we necessarily have to be kowtowing to meet their development plans when we should be thinking of the long-term issue of, with NZTA, and of course we're talking about roading and motorways, but also our rail network, which we already have 90% in place. If not 95, there's just that one gap to create a proper loop. And I'm sorry, that's what the CRL we're putting in place to double the capacity. So again, linking Manukau to Onehunga with rail is not a silly thing that we should be just dispensing. So I just emphasise that.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson, then Mayor Goff, and then Councillor Lee.
Mine's been done, that's right.
Thank you. Mayor Goff.
A couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. This is an NZTA project, not an Auckland Transport project, so they're meeting the predominant cost of it. But I want to pick up the Chairman's question about cost escalation, because I remember when this was originally announced, I think January last year, from the Prime Minister, the figure was put at about $1 billion, and now it seems to have escalated up to 1.8 billion. And so I'd kind of like an understanding as to why that escalation occurred, and I would like you to come back to us with the benefit-cost ratio, because I think it is a project in Auckland and we therefore need to know what that figure is. But my substantive question is on the other side. Council officers seem pretty comprehensively to have rejected the merits of the Onehunga Business Association and Onehunga Enhancement Society submissions, both in terms of any potential transport benefit and in terms of ecological impact. Councillor Clough quite rightly raised that there is another $300 million that would be involved, and that money has to be found somewhere. But I'm wondering whether you believe that there is any likelihood of common ground or a compromise solution being found with the local community, which was quite outspoken in terms of their concerns about the current east-west link. And I wonder whether there is room to move around areas such as extending the foreshore reserve down to the port, which is otherwise pretty cut off from the township, and whether there is the prospect, somebody mentioned that the transmission lines that go across the bay, which really do detract from the aesthetics of the area, whether that's an area where some gesture can be made to the local community and placemaking in the local community.
So to the Mayor's first point around the cost of the project, to be honest, it's not something that we've been exploring in detail. We've been focused on the environmental impacts and potential mitigation of those, rather than interrogating the ongoing escalating costs. So unfortunately, we can't. We just don't have that information on why the costs have escalated, but we could certainly ask for that from NZTA. In terms of the benefit-cost ratios, we are pushing to receive an update on those, so we'll certainly supply that. But maybe we'll ask for a comment around the increased costs as part of that. In terms of the ongoing engagement with the local community, you know, as I mentioned before, the discussions are still quite positive. There was a very positive session a couple of weeks ago where a smaller working group has gone away to look at options. We have mana whenua involvement as well, because there are some concerns from mana whenua point of view about any additional reclamation in that area. So it's not an easy one to resolve in terms of the wider community, including mana whenua. But we are working on that issue of whether some additional connectivity around the foreshore between the port and the existing reserve might be possible in a way that satisfies everyone's concerns. So yeah, the door certainly isn't shut yet. So there may still be room to move. The local community may perhaps accept that some of the additional crossings over the Manukau Harbour that their alternative involved might not be the best outcome, and that you know, there are other things that can be explored. So.
And could you just give us some clarification around the transmission lines? You mentioned that in
the
original
and that's part of the discussion as well, but obviously that involves Transpower. So there have been some conversations between NZTA and Transpower, and also Panuku Council and Transpower as well. So it may be that Council submission does include a point around some undergrounding of transmission lines as part of the mitigation for the overall project. So that is a live discussion. There are a number of transmission lines through that area, and we're hearing from Transpower that some of them are very costly and very problematic to underground, but others perhaps not so. So we're still actively working on that, and that may well be something that's in the council submission to support some undergrounding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Liddy, do you have a question, because you've already spoken to the item?
I just want to explain.
I'm sorry, I just have to keep to the standing orders, Councillor. You have one speaking turn, and I think you have taken that turn. So if you have a question, I'm willing to accept
Could I make a personal explanation?
No, I can't. We would all have. We would all relish in political explanations. I'm sorry, I can't receive it.
He can, understanding.
Ask a rhetorical question.
Further speakers, it is moved and seconded.
We're talking about one
vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you very much. We'll go to item 13. 13? members. And I think...
I move
Second.
recommendation.
It's moved Councillor Cooper, seconded Councillor Philip Piner. The information is before you, members, in two parts. Megan, I think it's reasonable that you do introduce it, and your team as well. And if you could...
Thank you, Mr Chair. We'll be really brief.
Key points.
Sure. Just introduce Yi Lin on my right and Jasmine on my left. We've put together this submission in conjunction with our CCO colleagues, particularly in Regional Facilities Auckland and Auckland Transport. And we worked with the Working Party as well. Thank you for your time on that. So this is a submission on the review of the Unit Titles Act. It's a discussion document the government has put out, which will lead in time, one presumes, to some legislation change. So that would again be another opportunity for Council to make a submission on any bill that comes through. So there are 7 key proposals in the discussion document. I've outlined that in the executive summary of the cover report. And the submission is attached, the draft submission is attached in your addendum agenda, and we're looking for any comments or changes needed today. We will make those and lodge those by the end of the week as required, and we've asked that the Chair be able to just make those minor amendments as needed. So happy to answer questions, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Any questions on this, members? There being none, it is moved and seconded. Like I thank Megan for your work on this, Councillor Hills for working with me on this. Good work. The Honourable Nikki Kay has been doing a lot of work on this. Hopefully it does lead to legislative change, because this is a critical body of work that affects Auckland probably more than anywhere else in the country, not forgetting Wellington and Christchurch and others. But as I view it, there are inherent in this, without this work, there continue to be barriers to people purchasing particularly apartments and other unit titles in Auckland, and it does need resolving. So thank you, Megan, and your colleagues and the others that have been inputting on this work. No questions. Excellent work. Moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Go to 15 on the GPS, the government... 14. Sorry, 14. 14 on the government policy statement. And I'll move. Do I have a second? Yep. Thank you, Councillor Clow. And we'll just wait for the staff to come up. Welcome, team, and apologies. What's the name?
Quinton and Phil.
Yeah, Quinton. Yeah, Quinton, your court.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. We have received recently the draft government policy statement from the Ministry of Transport. This was released in late February, and we are seeking to prepare a submission on that draft government policy statement on land transport, or GPS as we call it. There has been an email out to, for a political reference group to be established, which we'd like to be established to help us prepare that submission quickly. The submission is due at the end of this month, on the 31st, and in order to do that we need to move with quite a bit of haste, and we're looking forward to having that submission before the next planning committee for approval. The government policy statement on transport is a very important strategic document. It sets out activity classes for funding for transport and the government's policy position, and so it's important we do a good job in this submission. So that's what we're seeking to do today, is to establish that political reference group, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Quinton, and Phil, you're there and as an able assist if we need you. Members, I think the information is before us. We're not delving into the pros and cons of the GPS at this time. That will be undertaken by the reference group, and we have some names there of myself, Councillor Hills, Councillor Newman again.
Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. He's got incredible thirst there. Chairs Pippa Coombe and Shane Henderson, David Holm from Puketapapa, and Greg Presland. looks like a good mix. Daniel, are you reneging?
Speak now, forever hold your peace.
Are you recusing?
Yes, I am actually. Look, Mr Chair, this is critically important for the Auckland plan actually, the GPS on land transport. And this is critically important for negotiations, I think, around the ATAP work moving forward. Now, I mean, I'm happy to contribute to this, although I have to look at my diary. It's just getting out of hand here. But I really think that someone like the Deputy Mayor ought to be part of this conversation, given some of the debates that are going to be had around this, and I'm happy for him to substitute for me.
Well, actually, there's one small oversight there. Look, I know you're undertaking a lot at the moment, Councillor, and we appreciate that. I have omitted, and my apology, an IMSB representative, and I need.
We weren't going to raise.
Happy to put my hand up. I'm happy to put my hand up.
Not now.
Happy to put my hand up.
So, look, I would like to make sure that we have a representative of the IMSB there, and are the IMSB in a position to confirm that nomination? It would go before your next meeting.
It would have to go before the next meeting, and I think put a placeholder there, and we'll determine whether we need to have somebody on board or not.
Okay, we will put a placeholder there for an IMSB member. Can we adjust that? So we've got a pretty full house, but I hear Councillor Walker's interested in.
Yeah, I'm happy to put my hand up, and that might.
I think Linda had her name.
Might assist Daniel if you want to.
I'm no longer worried.
So can we just be clear on whether you're in or out? I don't want.
So I wasn't clear whether Councillor Newman's name's been taken off. Is he in there or not?
I'm out.
Councillor
I'm
Newman
happy
is.
to replace him.
Okay, now I've got Councillor Cooper and Councillor Walker expressing interest. So I'm happy to add the names, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Walker.
Thank you.
But no
Deputy Mayor?
No Deputy Mayor?
Deputy Mayor's got his work cut out.
Diary's just nuts, I'm sorry.
Right.
No, we've got a good
team there.
Good team there. It's moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare it carried. Quinton, Phil, thank you. Going now to another government initiative, and a good one, I think. And again, we need to establish a political reference group. Christina, would you like to briefly take us through this? We've got quite a lengthy document to follow, but I'm sure that will be, well, part of your work here, but on the policies, on the outline of the urban development authorities as proposed by the Minister. But we will leave the deep dive for the reference group. Christina?
Correct. Tēnā koutou, through the chair. The purpose of this is to let you know about the Urban Development Authority's discussion document, which was recently released by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. That was a couple of weeks ago now, and the intention of the proposed legislation is to enable better urban development at scale and where projects are strategically important. This also follows on from some of the recommendations that came out of the Productivity Commission's Using Land for Housing work. So what I'm seeking today is for agreement for there to be a submission from council, and that would be across council family. So we've already had discussions with Auckland Transport, Watercare, and Panuku, and they are in agreement that it needs to be a council family submission. That we will establish, or you will, establish a political reference group to provide direction to staff in developing the submission, and that partly given the time frames around the Easter holidays, that there be consideration of an iteration of the submission at the second May committee meeting. And then finally, to delegate authority to the chair and deputy chair of the committee to finalize the submission. So final deadline for the submission is the 19th of May to MB.
Thank you, Christina. Councillor Cooper?
I would like to nominate Councillor Hulse as Chairman of Environment and Communities, because these urban development authorities really affect our facilities, everything that we do, along with the planning. So if she would accept that, I think it would be really important.
Okay, we've got Councillor Hulse's name there. Councillor Hulse is accepting. Any other councillors that would like to participate in this? We're going to look at 3 local board members as well, and local boards can sort that representation out, and 1 independent Māori statutory board member. Is there another councillor that would like to participate? There are some key issues here, members, like using the Public Works Act, like overriding existing and proposed district plans. So there are some meaty issues here for us to address.
No, there's more urban land in North Shore. In lieu of representation, I will
Do I
put
hear
my
another
name
name?
forward.
Councillor Filipaina? I think I heard Councillor Filipaina. It's on the screen.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move. Do I have a second? Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Councillor Collins. Very willing to second Councillor Filipaina's nomination.
Absolutely.
It's moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. 16. And that's the Ford work program. Just a slight amendment on the recommendation there, members. Just get my pages. And that is with prioritisation to be confirmed at the next business meeting. So it's not a prioritised list at this time. Councillor Cooper?
So is this what you and the deputy have developed over this time?
This is the staff political input, and we're yet to prioritise that program.
Thank you.
I will move it. Seconded, Deputy Chair, Councillor Denise Lee. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Declare that carried. We've got the information reports on 291 of your agenda. Again, I'll move. Reasonably procedural. Members, all of this information that we might be considering at workshops is totally transparent. It's available for our communities to read. Of course, we don't print it off. We'd be printing several volumes of War and Peace. Thickness, thickness. Not the content. And it's all available on the website if anybody makes an inquiry for them to read. Councillor Cashmore?
Yes, thank you. So you're talking about item 17 now?
We are on 17.
Yeah. So I have some questions about the staff's input into the proposed Waikato regional plan change and the lack of consistency with what we've suggested Waikato should do compared to what we've recommended in our own unitary plan.
Okay, now, the item notes that we don't have staff present to fetch questions.
I'm just making that point, and I will dig into it a bit more further.
We'll follow it up.
Saw it myself, and we're following that one up.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Will help me down.
It's moved and seconded. Councillor Cooper seconded it, and that's item 17. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. There are no extraordinary items under 18, and so that completes our, just check, our open order paper business. So I'll, yes, I'll move it now. So I'll move the procedural motion as on the screen, members, seconded Councillor Filipaina, to exclude the public for the reasons outlined. And following this motion, we will adjourn for lunch and come back in public excluded session immediately after lunch. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Thank you for those staff that have been here today, members of the public that have been here to observe, and media, and we will reconvene at 1 p.m. to consider the confidential agenda, members. Thank you.